violins, violas, cellos, and upright basses. Technical parts of a violin and terms. Obviously it uses strings. My favorite joke is the difference between a violin and a viola is the violin uses strings and fiddles, and fiddles use strings. Here are going to be carved instruments, and carved is string lingo for solid wood. They will always have a spruce top and they will always have maple backs and sides. I'm sure there are exceptions, but you will rarely see. This is a chin rest because that is what the chin actually goes on. We sell accessories that go on the back, which are called shoulder rests. Shoulder rests serve a couple of different functions. They make it a lot more comfortable for the instrument to play, but you also notice that if I wanted to hold this up with my shoulder, I would have to raise my shoulder and push my chin down to hold up the instrument so I can play it, or hold it up with my left hand, but that's going to develop a lot of bad habits. So everybody that plays violin really needs to have some sort of a shoulder rest. This is the most popular one we sell. It's made by Muco. It runs $20. We sell less expensive foam cushiony pads that are just, $10 or less, sometimes less than $5. That will suffice for the time being if you're talking about a small child. But the structured ones that have legs like this are preferred because they provide a lot more support for the instrument. The Viva brand and the Kuhn brand shoulder rests are also popular. The biggest difference between those and this one is that the more expensive ones have legs that fold down. You'll notice in your case there's not a whole lot of storage in there, so it's really hard to get a shoulder rest fit in there. If you have fold down legs though, it's going to be a lot more apt to fit in your case. How to fit the shoulder rest to the instrument, you'll notice it has a wave to it. Well, the wave needs to fit the contour of your shoulder. So you'll put the part of the shoulder rest that is closest to the violin on the side that has the chin rest. That way it lines up with your chin and your shoulder. All right, so this would be placed on this direction. So now with the shoulder rest in place, now I can put it on my shoulder and do it with just a little bit of pressure of my chin and keep my shoulder, my relaxed position, and be able to focus on playing with my left hand. If there is a difference between a violin and a fiddle, sometimes fiddle players prefer to have their bridge shaved a little bit shallower, so their triple and double stops where you play 2 or 3 strings at a time is a lot easier. Classical violinists typically will prefer a higher arch, that way they're not accidentally running into other strings. They usually play one note at a time. If they do double stops, and that's relatively easy regardless of the arch of the bridge. Triple stops, you probably want that bridge shaped a little bit shorter. But classical violinists very rarely, if ever, will do a triple stop in their music. The fingerboard is here. This is called a tailpiece, just like it is on a banjo or a mandolin. The tailpiece is attached to the end pin via this little wire here, which is called a tail gut. And it's called a tail gut because in the olden days they actually used to use a gut for a cord back here. Nowadays they're usually some sort of a nylon substance, but that's what that is called. And occasionally that will slip or break, which you need to have that replaced at that point. The top of the violin is here, the back is here. The sides of the violin are called ribs. You got the neck up here, which is where you'll typically carry a violin. Up here is not a headstock like you would call it on other stringed instruments. This is called the scroll of the instrument. These are tuning pegs. And these little guys down here on the tailpiece are called fine tuners. There's a couple of different varieties of fine tuners. If you open up your instrument, I'm sure we'll find other styles. These fine tuners are built into the tailpiece. So it's also very popular to have fine tuners that extend beyond the tailpiece. You don't have fine tuners because your tuning pegs are geared. They're called precision pegs. And those are kind of rare. We have some of those in our inventory, but not very many. The geared pegs, like what she is holding, turn just like a guitar tuner. You don't have to wedge them into the scroll, which we'll talk about in just a second. You just turn them and they stay where you turn. This is the other style of fine tuners. Now these fine tuners can be replaced individually if need be, without a problem. We sell these fine tuners over there on the shelf. They just run a few bucks a piece. You can swap these in and out. The fine tuners that are built into the tailpiece, if the threads go out on these and it starts popping and slipping, then you have to replace the whole tailpiece. There's really no fixing. A lot of students will prefer to have their instrument taped, which you see my instrument here is taped. What the tapes do is they provide a visual reference, similar to frets on an instrument, but obviously this is a fretless instrument. But with that visual reference, they can see where their finger needs to go, and they can learn that technique and be able to tell what their first 3 fingerings are. The tapes have pros and cons because it's automotive pinstriping is what it is. But the cons to tape are that if you are playing a note in between the tape, then sometimes you'll get a buzz from the string rubbing up against the tape, and that's not a pretty sound. Also, when you play on the tape, it also deadens the sound a little bit because you're pushing it down onto that plastic adhesive, and that's kind of sucking up some of the vibrations of the strings. So those are the cons to it. You won't see professionals playing with taped fingerboards because of the cons, and also because when you are, when you're pretty fluent in your violin, you're not going to have to be looking at your fingers at all anyway. Some of our advanced violins, like the ones hanging out there that we call step-ups, won't have all of the fine tuners on the tailpiece. The reason why is because when you have a high quality instrument that's professionally fitted and working very, very well, then you can play the instrument and tune up here as you play the note and be able to get it perfectly in pitch. Besides, because you have linkages on your fine tuners down here, it technically will absorb some of the vibrations of your string as it passes through the tailpiece. So advanced professional violinists will prefer to have the best, fullest sound pulled out of their instrument they can possibly get, which means they'll eliminate their fine tuners down. Inside as you're holding it this way, inside my top F hole here, I see a little stick that is going from the top of the instrument to the back of the instrument. That's called a sound post. Now your bridge and your sound post are both held in by tension of the strings. They're not glued in, which means if I drop all my strings down so there's no tension, my bridge is just literally going to fall off the instrument. It's nothing to panic about. You can put the bridge up relatively easily. The position of the bridge goes between the notches on the inside of the F hole. If you draw an imaginary line between those notches, that's where the bridge is. Same thing with mandolin. The sound post, sometimes if your bridge falls, your sound post might fall as well. Because if you're relying on the tension of the strings to create pressure on the top of the instrument, then it's pushing that sound post against the back of the instrument, and that's what's making it stand up. So if you have somebody come in with a fallen bridge on your instrument, check the sound post, make sure it's still standing. If it's not, that needs to be put up before you restring the instrument. If not, then you run a risk of collapsing the top of the instrument. On the inside of the instrument, usually on the bottom of this F hole, you will find a label down there. That's where you will find the serial number. Sometimes it's easy to read, sometimes it's not, but that's where it should be. Occasionally on some of our Scholl & Roth instruments, there will be 2 labels in there and the serial number might be up here. But that just means that if you don't see a serial number down there, look up there. If you don't see a serial number at all, let's say you're checking in a repair for a stringed instrument that was bought online and it's just a real inexpensive instrument-shaped object, or ISO as I call them. A lot of times they won't have labels or serial numbers. You can just check that in as violin or 3/4 violin or whatever and use that as a serial number. Violins are fractional size instruments. We have a 1/16 out there. They go all the way 1/16, 1/4, 1/8, 1/10, 1/2, 3/4, full size. How you measure the instrument is from the bottom of the back to the top of the back, not including the heel of the neck, which is this little bump that sticks out. This instrument is 13 inches long on the body So it's either a 13-inch viola, which is measured in inches, or it is a 3/4 size violin. A half-size violin would be 12 inches long, and a full-size violin is 14 inches long. Same distance as a 13, 14-inch viola. So the differences between those instruments, if you have a 14-inch viola and a full-size violin, they're going to look pretty much identical. Well, a quick indicator as to which is a violin and a viola is look at your highest pitched string. You have the student stand with their hands straight out to your left, and you put the yardstick where their neck meets their shoulder, their palm up, and whatever instrument falls in the middle of their palm is what they're well suited for. This is the violin side, which maxes out down here, so I'm obviously long enough to be able to play a full-size violin. If I flip it over to the viola side and do it with my palm up, the middle of my palm runs about right smack between 15.5 and 16-inch. So I wouldn't want to do a 16.5-inch viola. That'd be a little bit too long for me. What you run into if you fit somebody with an instrument that's too big for them is they'll be stretching too far and learning poor hand positions. And depending on how often they play, they can also risk doing some damage to their wrist and in their shoulder as well. Usually students aren't playing that much, but still, you don't want them to learn incorrect hand position from playing an instrument that's too big. If you have the instrument available, then have the student stand, with their arm out, put the instrument on that corner of the shoulder and the neck, not in playing position down here, but up here, because we're just measuring them, and then have them wrap their hand around the scroll. And if they can do that and have a bend in their elbow, then that's an okay instrument for them, okay? Get the largest instrument where they can still reach that and have a slight bend. If they have to lock their elbow to get their hand out that far, or if their hand doesn't go far enough to wrap around the scroll, then you need to get a smaller instrument for that. So 2 different ways to measure, both of which work just fine. On a cello or a bass, to measure proper fitment for them, not as easy because you actually have to have the instrument, but you'll have them set in a standard chair like this. Piano bench is a little bit too tall, so a standard chair would be ideal. Have them set with the cello in front of them. You'll need to adjust the end pin so that their knees fall in the hip of the instrument, the narrowest part. You want their knees to be right in that hip. And then if the tuning pegs are right around where their left ear is, then that would be a good fit for them. If they sit with their knees in the hip and the tuning pegs are over their head, they need a smaller cello. It's okay in some regards for the tuning pegs to run a little bit short. Like if you have a really big person, they don't make anything bigger than a full-size cello. So they'll just have to raise up the end pin to the proper position so they still have the tuning pegs right by their ear. If it's wound, you're holding a viola. If it's a solid string, you're holding a violin. So that's a really quick way to tell which is which. Otherwise, you need to see what the pitches are on the strings, also kind of look at the diameter, see which one appears to have thicker strings. The one with thicker strings is going to be a viola. Now, a viola is tuned C, G, D, A, and a violin skips the C string and starts on the G, and it's tuned G, D, A, E. So they share 3 different strings. They all share the G, the D, and the A. You're also capable of stringing a violin as a viola, or vice versa, stringing a viola as a violin. Unless it's a 15-inch viola or longer, you're not going to find violin strings long enough to string that instrument as a violin. The other difference between violins and violas, but it's very subtle, is the thickness of the body. This is a viola in my right hand. You'll notice that the body is just slightly thicker. That's to create a little bit larger box to allow the low strings to resonate a little bit better, give you a better, bigger, fuller sound. When you are tuning an instrument, these tuning pegs are held in by the friction of the wood against the wood. Okay? The peg has a slight taper to it, and so do the holes in the tuning box up here, which is what that area is called. When you're tuning, you need to be applying inward pressure as you turn it. Otherwise, your string is going to act like a spring, and it's just going to make it return back to the original starting pitch. When you're tuning, okay, that's obviously too low. So as I tune it up to pitch, I'll kind of listen to the note and push in as I turn. Otherwise, it won't stick. We have a lot of students that will come in and say their instrument doesn't stay in tune because these keep slipping on them. It's probably because they're not applying enough inward pressure as they tune. If you are applying a significant amount of pressure and it's still not sticking, then that needs to be refit. And you can take it to Dwayne, and he has special tools to re-round the peg, re-round the hole. That way you have better contact, better friction, and it'll stick better. If it's too sticky and it jerks or it pops when you try to turn it, then we have a peg compound out there that acts as a lubrication to allow that peg to turn a lot smoother. How to apply that stuff is you would actually have to relax your string all the way, pull your peg out, and you can see the shiny areas where it contacts the wood. When you pull that out, you apply just a little dab to those shiny areas. Once these are in tune up here, then on a day-to-day basis, really the student should just have to turn these a little bit. Because your strings will never rise in pitch overnight, they always seem to fall, then with just a couple of little twists of your fine tuner down here will bring the instrument up to pitch. When you run out of threading though down there and these get bottomed out, then you'll have to back them out to restart, tune up here with the pegs, and then you'll have room there. If you get in a situation where you're restringing a violin or a viola or cello or whatnot, make sure you back out the fine tuners all the way. That way, when you turn it here, when the student gets it home and it's a little bit under pitch, then they'll have some room to adjust their fine tuners. If you leave those all the way down and you bring it into pitch up here, then really those are useless. The bow is made of horsehair. There are synthetic hairs out there that we try to stay away from. Horsehair has always worked out the best. It's okay for your bow to have a curve in it this direction as I'm holding it up. Okay, that's totally normal. You want that to have a bow there. If you hold up and down though, you want your bow to be perfectly straight. If it's warped and it's curved, then you're probably going to want to replace that bow because you don't want it to curve side to side, just up and down. The tip of the bow is down here. There should be a little white bone or plastic covering that covers the tip. Down on this end, we have this area of the bow, which is called the grip. The grips can be made of numerous different substances like rubber, leather. You can have metal windings down there. You can have nylon windings. There's lots of different styles and types of grips. The part that holds your hair down here that sticks up, for some reason, is called a frog. I don't know why it has that term, but that's what it's called, is a frog. The end piece here that turns, this is a tensioner. If you tighten that, then it will tighten the hair on your bow. And the proper placement for hair on your bow, you don't want to tighten it so your bow is straight. You want to keep a little bit of a curve in there. But you do want to produce enough of a gap so if you wanted to stick your pinky between the hair and the bow, you could. That's approximately how far it needs to be gapped there. And that should be proper tension to play your instrument with. When you're not playing your instrument, you always want to release the tension of the hair before you put it in the case for two reasons. Number one is it keeps your hair from stretching. If your hair stretches too much, then you run out of adjustment on your frog down here, and then your bow won't get the proper amount of tension. You'll have to have your hair redone or totally rehaired. Also, you want to keep the bow in the bow, and if you keep it under constant tension, eventually that bow is going to reshape itself and it'll end up being straight. Bow etiquette is when you're carrying a bow, you should always let it dangle. Okay, that way if you do happen to hit something, you don't chip it or break it. Also, you don't want to touch the horsehair because the oils in your skins will cause that horsehair to break down prematurely and break faster. So try not to touch the hair and always dangle the bow. Yeah, rosin is like a processed tree sap. We carry light rosin and dark rosin and then higher end rosins. The difference between the light rosin and the dark rosin is the dark rosin is a little bit softer, a little bit tackier. It's good for cellos and bass players. Light rosin is good for violins and violas. Buildup of rosin will deaden the sound of the string. They would use the finest grade of steel wool, like a quadruple aught, and you can use that and it'll take that steel wool off there without damaging the string. You don't want to do it every day because it'll eventually wear your string down. It's not uncommon for rosin to get all over the top of the instrument too. So you'll see all that powdery substance and it's real tacky and sticky and kind of nasty. Just wipe it down every day or every other day, they won't have that problem. Now when you play these things, you're supposed to play with the edge of the horsehair. So if you angle the bow away from you a little bit, about a 45-degree angle, you're not supposed to use all of the horsehair at once. Just use the edge.
Conservation.
Mute. If somebody comes in and they say their teacher needs them to get a mute, or if their music says they need a mute, then what they're talking about is this little round guy. This is a torp style mute or a round mute. This one is specific for violin or viola. It fits behind the bridge. It can ride on the strings, so when I'm not using it, it can just rest back there on the tailpiece. When I am using it, then it just goes up and it clips on the bridge. And it makes quite a bit of difference in the tone of the instrument, but not much in the volume. So this is without the mute. When I put the mute on there, change it a little bit. Okay? If they want a mute that deadens the sound of the instrument because they want to be able to play it in one room and have somebody sleeping in the other room, then what they need is this. This is called the ultimate practice mute. And this totally encloses the top of the bridge, just snaps on like that, and really deadens the sound of the instrument. A lot less resonance. And I'll take it off and play again, just so you can hear the difference. Those are your main styles of mutes. We also have a metal sliding mute, which does essentially the same thing as this. Just a different style. This is the most preferred one though because it's the least expensive and easy to use, easy to replace. Little round mute. They make these in cello and bass sizes, so we carry those as well. On cellos and basses that have end pins, when you're playing a cello, it's going to be at a pretty significant angle. Well, on a floor like this, sometimes it will have a tendency to slip away. So we carry these little round things, which are end pin stoppers. The people will call them rock stop, although rock stop is actually a common brand. It's sort of like calling tissues Kleenexes. This is a rock stop, so to speak. And that sits on the floor so you have something to put your end pin in so it doesn't slip away from you when you play. Another option is the end pin anchor or strap, which is made by Zeros. That's what this is. And how it works is it has this metal loop there that will go underneath the leg of your chair, and then the strap goes out and ends in that. That way you can put your end pin in that, and it makes it impossible for the instrument to slide further away from your chair as you're playing it. Two different styles. Upright bass players, since they are standing and not using a chair for the most part, they'll just use the rock stop, so to speak. We carry care kits for stringed instruments. It has polish in it, has rosin in it, has a cloth to wipe down your strings or your instrument, whatever need be, and then it has a polishing cloth specifically for the wood. But for the most part, it's spruce and maple. Nicer instruments will have nice flaming on the maple on the back. The more advanced violins will have better seasoned tone woods on them. By seasoning, I mean they may be sitting in a shed for 20, 30 years before they construct it into a violin, which gives that wood a lot of opportunity to dry thoroughly, to just kind of rest in its natural state. And then also the way that they carve the wood. On advanced instruments, they will actually go through and find the hot spots and the tonal centers of the instrument, and they'll disassemble the instrument, and they'll go through and they'll shave out and thin out specific spots so it resonates better. The less expensive instruments, not so much. They'll run it through a plane, make it look like a violin, and they'll glue it together. Now on cellos and basses, it's pretty common to see those laminated. You can even have a laminated scroll on cellos and basses to save money. If you have a fully laminated instrument and you're going to make something carved, the thing that makes the most significant difference is the top, just like in your guitar, and then the scroll. There are two different types of woods that they use on the fingerboards and on the chin rests and tuning pegs. It's ebony and boxwood. Boxwood is kind of this blonde-looking wood up here. These are boxwood pegs. Real cheap instruments will use some other type of wood, and then they'll stain it black or paint it black to make it look like ebony. But if it's not as hard as ebony, it's not going to sound near as good.